Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan, and in this video we're going to be talking about the brand new FLC character, Epidemius. This is a new legendary lord that will be available for you for free if you have your account linked to Total War Access. So if you've already got access to characters like Ulrika, then as soon as you download the patch, you'll have access to him. So Epidemius leads a brand new faction known as the Tallyman of Pestilence, and he's going to be very similar to Kugath, but with his own special and unique mechanics. First, before anything, we need to talk about his faction effects and lord effects. Gains powerful rewards based on the number of plagues on non-Nurgle factions. Cycle time -1 for Plague Flesh Poppies building, recruit rank +2 for Plague Bearers of Nurgle and Exalted Plague Bearers of Nurgle. Keep in mind that this is faction-wide too, which means that you're actually going to be having a fair amount of armies with Plague Bearers. The Nurgling spam is gone, by the way. Now, campaign movement range +25% for Plague Cultists, that's the last of the faction effects. For the Lord effects, we have the following. Tallyman's Blades allows you to summon in a unit of Exalted Plague Bearers of Nurgle, passive ability Regeneration when fighting against enemies with a Plague, and finally, melee attack +5 when fighting against an enemy with a Plague for Lord's Army. Overall, the faction and lord effects are quite good from my experience, and the fact that you're going to be able to get Plague Cultists moving further is going to help you with your tally. Alright, so the character only has a start position in the Immortal Empires. Yes, Creative Assembly have finally been listening to our pleas, and it seems that we might be getting some more characters introduced in IE only. His start is actually just where Daniel used to be. Daniel's been moved further to the right, and you'll be fighting against that minor Tzeentchian faction. Also keep in mind that Malus Darkblade is right next to you, and he is going to hurt. I'm going to be very honest with you. It's been a little bit of a struggle trying to get used to him, as we know that Malus is really strong. Let's talk about the character himself. So Epidemius is focused on being more of a melee / buffer character, I think is probably the best way of calling it. He's not a spellcaster, which is a bit of a shame. He wasn't in the tabletop, so it's understandable, but yeah, his unique skill line focuses quite heavily on buffing up your troops. And I mean really buffing up your troops, getting some massive weapon strength bonuses and upkeep reductions towards Plague Bearers, Pox Riders, pretty much anything that has a Plague Bearer on it. There's also extra bonuses towards your physical resistance of your Nurgle demons in your army. You're going to be buffing up your forces very heavily, and I think that's going to be very thematic with how Epidemius was in lore. You're still getting a lot more buffs coming in a bit later, don't you worry about that, but overall, this is going to be a bit more of a tanky army than anything else. You also get some faction-wide bonuses to reduce the cost to create a plague, and then finally, reducing the immunity for all future plagues, which is actually going to be very good for you. Your two new unique items are actually fairly decent too, as, yeah, pretty good bonuses. One's available at rank 7 and the other one's available at rank 12. That one will require a quest battle. I am pretty keen. The only thing that I have a complaint about is that the bonus with the Demons of Chaos is at rank 12. It should have been at rank 7, as sometimes Daniel dies out a little bit earlier, and especially if you're playing harder difficulties, you're going to want to be able to have some sort of a friend being your buffer to your right as you deal with Malus to your left. But now we have to talk about the unique mechanic for Epidemius. This is the Tally of Pestilence. And essentially, this is a fairly good representation of what he is in lore. Not so much on the tabletop, because those bonuses were always keeping up there. But, yeah, the more plagues that you have affecting enemy armies and enemy settlements, this would be pretty much anything that isn't a Nurgle faction, everything is basically counted as an enemy in this pool, the more bonuses you'll start to get. So as you go from 1 to 4 plagues, you'll get extra research bonus, a passive ability, and the enemy will also have their leadership reduced, but it keeps getting better and better. On 5 to 9 it gets a little bit better, on 10 to 19 it gets a lot better, and then finally you've got the final one, which is on 20 plus. Which, you know, research rate plus 50% is insane, and then you obviously get more uses for the Talisman's Blades, reducing the replenishment rate and leadership of enemy armies quite heavily. Yep, it's a pretty fun mechanic from what I've been able to play around with. The only thing is, you have to keep in mind that you have to keep using plagues. If your plagues start expiring, then your bonuses start getting lesser and lesser to the point that eventually you'll just have no bonuses. So the idea is, unlike Kugaf, where you're making the strongest plagues possible, what you want to do here is throw out as many plagues as you can. When it comes to Epidemius, it's more about quantity and not quality. Mind you, once you start getting a lot of infections per turn, it's more going to be a bit of both. So your campaign has two roadblocks. First, you want to deal off with the Tzeentch faction. I would recommend selling the minor settlement of Volcano's Heart to Daniel, and that way you'll be able to get a bit of an alliance going, and then going to deal with Malice. Now, that's not all, because obviously, whilst the Epidemius character doesn't have that many unique mechanics, there is a major and drastic change to that of the Nurgle faction and race as a whole. So we're going to talk about all those details in this video. There has been a massive overhaul to the technology for Nurgle, so this is not only for Epidemius, but also Kugaf and Tamokon too, and, well, pretty much everything coming throughout the rest of this video is going to be for everyone, I think. But yeah, the first thing is, you'll notice you've got two sections now, faction and military. In terms of faction, you're going to get a bunch of buffs. This is stuff like getting some extra growth for all provinces, getting some magic item drop chance, all the usual administration things which can really boost up your faction. There's also some pretty good technology here, like for example reducing the turn times for the cycles, which means that you're going to be able to field armies much faster and have a lot more in reserve. I know a lot of people were actively avoiding Nurgle as a race purely because one of the issues being the technology tree, the other one being building, but we'll get to that a little bit later. But yeah, this is so much better. You will notice there's some techs which do cost infections, and infections are becoming a lot more of a key resource that we're going to talk about in more detail a bit later down the line. But overall, this change is a huge quality of life improvement, and it will be more noticeable once you get your hands into it and once you can start playing around with different things. Infrastructure-wise, I think everything has been covered fully. Honestly, I haven't gone through it and thought, yeah, something is missing here. There's something missing for Kugaf though, but we'll talk about him in his own dedicated video. Now, the second section focuses very heavily around military, and it's something that we do need to talk about too, because you're going to be spending a lot of time, at least at the start of your campaign, on the faction stuff, and that's very understandable because you want those bonuses as fast as possible. But when we go into the military section, it's more or less the same size, just different format, and I think it does it actually much better because there's a bit of a separation when it comes to some techs with mortal and demons. Now, the majority of them are linked up, so when you get certain bonuses, they will be for both mortal and demon, but when it comes to theming your armies, if you want to focus more on playing as a demon faction with Epidemius, well, you can focus on that. And the CA have already made Tamokon playstyle public. You know, if you want to focus with Chaos Warriors, which the faction effects kind of show that, then you can focus on that. Again, there are some techs which require infections, and these ones are fairly expensive. However, they are pretty much the best that you can get for a faction in terms of just bonuses and ban spells for great unclean ones in terms of number of uses. Yeah, this is probably one of the better ones for the monogods now, I would say, in terms of just how the layout is done and how the bonuses are in. The original tech tree was focused originally on just stuff like Kugaf and the Realm of Chaos campaign, whereas this now is well-rounded. If you decide to move a character with a mod, say for example into Lustria, you're not going to have that many problems either. Okay, we're going to talk about construction now because it's the same but also different. You see, the basic military buildings now only cost infections. You don't have to spend like 5,000 treasury to build up a basic building. And what you will notice is that the buildings themselves do provide better troops. This is because, well, the cycles are generally a bit better and you can reduce them, but also the case that they just provide more. So you can see there from the very beginning, you're going to be getting a lot more troops coming out, which means that you're going to be able to field armies a lot quicker too. This will also be the same case for the advanced military buildings, where things are just going to feel a lot better. In terms of army-wise, I think by turn 50, I actually was fielding around 7 or 8 armies, and they were fairly stacked up. It wasn't just Nurglings. Things do change, however, when we start looking towards other buildings, like, for example, defense. Defense now gives you a proper defense. You get proper garrisons, and they go up to 3 tiers. That means that your buildings will be a bit more protectable, your settlements will be safer, and yeah, I mean, you get all your heroes from here. This means that every single hero that you have available to you is through your defense building, so you're going to have to build at least one of them once. The biggest and most noticeable change, however, is the changes to infrastructure. They're no longer cycles, and instead act like every other faction. So you've got infection different buildings, you've got a proper economy building too, you can actually get some really good money coming in when it comes to playing as Nurgle, and actually end up as one of the richest factions too. All bases are covered here, and you will notice that when you have more growth, so for example more than 200, or if you have 5 population surplus, you're going to get a bunch more bonuses too. This is going to make Nurgle a very powerful faction. Not so much for the AI, as the AI does struggle a little bit, I will be very honest with you there, but if you're playing it yourself, if you know how to manage these things, you're going to be, well, more than fine, I'll tell you that. It's one of these factions where you're going to find yourself snowballing fairly quickly if you just kind of plan out how your buildings are going to be and synergize them with all the other mechanics. And a really big change for Nurgle is that you can now rush your military cycles. This means that if you end up with a lot of infections, which is still going to be the same surplus that you're more or less going to get as you were prior to patch 5.0, you're going to be able to rush them and get specific troops, essentially. If you want to get a lot more plague bearers but don't have them in your surplus right now, but you do have yourself a lot of infections, well, you might as well start spending them, especially if your plagues are not that expensive. Your commandments have been changed. These now provide some better bonuses to feel in line with Nurgle's 5.0 update. I would say that they feel a lot better, especially as plague duration can be buffed up, you get a lot more growth coming in, and also reducing the cost for cycling. So a fun tip here is you could easily have a few of your very safe provinces to be focused around army recruitment and just spam away. As a quick note, since we've talked about bonuses and obviously the infrastructure, you can see that it is actually fairly better to be able to recruit armies. I've got a fair amount of different units over here in this starting army with Epidemius, including a hero, a few Nurglings because, I mean, they're cheap and you might as well at the very beginning, but also some Plague Bearers, some Exalteds, 16 units into a army, and my economy hasn't tanked. It's actually really nice to see it this way, as obviously Nurgle did suffer very heavily from this before. Alright, now we're going to talk about plagues, because plagues are a very important part of the Nurgle playstyle as a whole. So, the system has been totally rebuilt to still function in a similar way. The end goal is still the same, but it focuses heavily on constructing stuff in a more random point of view rather than a very linear way. And I kind of like it, to be honest. So once again, you've got access to 3 different symptoms that you can play around with. Your campaign will always start in the same location, but after you do 3 different plagues, well, that's going to reset and change around. So they might be in different locations, meaning that maybe those symptoms that you like so much, you won't have access to for this round. You'll have to play around with different plagues. And the thing is, it's not really an issue, because you're going to be getting so many infections as you start progressing for your campaign that, yeah, you're going to have so many plagues all over the place. It adds in a little bit more of an element of RNG, but I feel like it's done in a very good way, and yeah, I don't miss the old system. Further to that, you can use infections to boost up your plague capabilities a little bit further by increasing the success chance. You increase your duration, or even just reduce the amount of immunity that enemy armies can have, because keep in mind that yes, they can be immune from plagues for a certain amount of time. Overall, I think this is a pretty good system. You can see how everything is just laid out a lot better, and it's very sad that unfortunately Skrulk does not have this just yet. I have begged and pleaded and cried to Creative Assembly though. You'll also have noticed that some symptoms have these kind of postulant buboes to them, and that basically means that it's a blessed symptom. When it's a blessed symptom, it gets double the benefits that it normally got, which makes them really good, and you can actually start getting more and more of them as you progress for your campaign. Kugath being the better one, who is going to have a lot more blessed symptoms, considering that his campaign is focusing around that. But plagues will definitely feel a lot more useful with both Kugath and Epidemius. I can't really comment on Tamokon just yet, and not just as a mechanic that you can easily forget, because let's be honest, every time that I've been playing as Kugath, I've mostly been forgetting about plagues. Now it seems that there's a lot more reason to use them, and that's always great because, I mean, yeah, it's a core feature, right? And it's part of, like, the lore of Nurgle since, like, the 80s. Cults are functionally the same, but yeah, I don't think that's a bad thing. Honestly, the fact is they synergize very well with this new system where you need a lot more infections, especially if you want to build up a proper army. So the system itself does generally play a lot better now. You'll actually want to care about where your cults are going. You'll want to get some friendships going with the other Nurgle factions to be able to get cults in their areas, because whilst you can get access to them, you might as well use them. Eventually, they'll slowly become forgotten about, but until then, you know, it's still going to be useful, especially playing as Epidemius once again and having that random plague go off and then spreading across the Empire, getting you some pretty tasty bonuses. Yeah, I mean, it's the main thing to keep an eye on. Now, the next thing is Unholy Manifestations. Yeah, they still feel the same. The difference is that you don't need that much corruption now. It's been reduced quite drastically now, only up to 2,000, I believe, was the maximum. So, yeah, this actually means that you're going to be using them a little bit more. It's a mechanic that does kind of get ignored, barring, you know, Scarbrand's summon an army to attack you situation so you can get more momentum. So yeah, it's nice to see some core mechanics actually being useful for once. It's one of these things that are very important because core mechanics add into faction fantasy, and again, this is a fantasy game. Now, I think you can see that the Nurgle changes are actually quite good. I'm here with a Epidemius campaign at turn 40, and I've conquered a fair amount of land. I think it's very, very noticeable to see that, yeah, the faction is a lot better. You are dealing with a lot more armies. I think at this point I've got like 5 armies running around. Two pushing to Sigvald and Valkyr and so on. 2 going down into the territories of Norska, and then 1 right now just focusing around Cracker Drak. Overall, I would say that everything for the Nurgle update is very good, and it's going to be very, very noticeable now. It's going to be like apples and oranges if you decide to compare the 2 campaigns. When it comes to Epidemius himself, yeah, the faction feels great. The faction is still very bare bones, keep that in mind, it's an FLC character, but his unique mechanic makes him feel a lot stronger because you're getting all your bonuses towards your armies, you're getting much faster research rates, which means you're finishing your tree faster. Now, I haven't done that much in this campaign because I was actually doing these recordings for this specific part for the Nurgle Rework, so I don't want to show Epidemius' mechanic in play here, or else, well, I would be way too strong. And that's the thing, it's noticeable, right? So in another campaign that I was playing, which I can't show to you because it's got the Tamukon units in, and unfortunately I can't show those until next week, by around turn 120-ish, I had pretty much all the Dark Elf lands. I was pushing into Lustria. I had a few armies pushing into the Empire. I think most of the Empire was gone. And yeah, I was dominating. I was absolutely dominating. And if memory serves, I was starting to prepare some armies to push into Brittonia and also the territories of Ulthuan. So yeah, Nurgle feels better. Epidemius as a character is really, really strong. Definitely one that you're going to want to play if you like the Nurgle fantasy of plagues, but the plagues being all over the place rather than being centralized and being very, very strong. When it comes to the character as a whole, the faction, it's going to be a tough start at the beginning. You definitely have one major road bump, which is Malice. If you can take him out early, then it's smooth sailing from there. It's important to keep an eye out on Throg. Sometimes he can declare war on you. The minor Chaos factions, all in all, will leave you alone. The major ones, like Sigvald and Valkyr, might cause you a few problems here and there, as obviously they do have a little bit of aversion against you. But really, yeah, sort out the big problem and then you're golden. I think I was able to double my territory, maybe even close to triple it within 20 turns. So that was turn 19 all the way to turn 40, and it's just easy to see how the faction is now playable. I know some creators, for example, who have actively avoided playing anything to do with Nurgle since pretty much the launch of Warhammer 3, because they heard how much of a slog it is, and I tell you what, it is drastically changed now, and I feel like it's for the better. Now, we're at the end of the video, but I want to take advantage and say one thing here, which I think is very important, not only to say, but also to stress out to Creative Assembly. It's great to see that Immortal Empire's exclusive characters are being introduced. These are characters which are not tied to the Realm of Chaos, which are tied to the further overarching endpoint of the game being the Immortal Empire's campaign, the huge mega map. It's something that needs to be explored more, as one, it's very noticeable that the Realm of Chaos map is starting to feel a little bit constrained. Yes, even despite the fact that that has not actually had that much DLC, you know, Warhammer 3 has been on a slow basis for the time being, but yeah, seeing characters introduced in Mortal Empires, just like how Dreiksha was for Warhammer 2, is something that needs to be explored more, because people do want FLC Legendary Lords. It's very, very obvious that they prefer that to FLC heroes. And most importantly, we're getting to the point where races are pretty much almost done in terms of missing units. It's something that is very, very clear. This might not be the case for Nurgle. We will likely see some future content in the future, but others, yeah, pretty much done. However, what is not done is the fact that there's a lot of missing characters. With this system, they could easily take advantage of this and introduce a bunch of playable characters in Immortal Empires exclusively. They have no story. They can have a simple but effective new mechanic which synergizes with their already base mechanics. And yeah, we could end up with the world that everyone wants, as full as humanly possible. This is a good step forward, Creative Assembly, and I hope that you are listening. With all that being said, guys, let me know what you guys think about Epidemius, about the Nurgle rework, and I'll see you all again very, very soon. There is a lot of videos coming out today, and yeah, I'll be streaming too at twitch.tv/thegreatbookofgrudges. Pop by. It's going to be a busy 2 weeks.